Let's just dive right into this. Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are unpacking a really fascinating compromise in human history. Look, if you've ever found yourself wedged into a cramped airplane seat, you know the drill. Elbows glued to your sides, knees practically bashing the tray table. You've probably sat there and thought, was it always this miserable? Well, spoiler alert, it wasn't. Flying actually used to be the absolute height of glamour and luxury. But as we'll see today, that incredible, sprawling spaciousness of the past came with a terrifying hidden cost. Essentially, we traded our luxurious flying experience for, well, survival. And the reasons why are absolutely wild. To really grasp this trade-off, we have to step back into the golden age of aviation, right around the 1950s. Passengers back then, they were lounging in these spacious bed seats that reclined all the way flat for a proper nap. I mean, there were actual lounges, cocktail bars, and, get this, sometimes even a piano right there in the cabin. No way, right? Now think about our reality today. We get cramped middle seats, we fight a silent war over the armrest, and we're packed in like sardines. It feels entirely unfair. So if you're ever frustrated by modern travel, it is kind of validating to realize just how incredibly good they had it back in the day. And hey, it wasn't just the seats that were over the top. Imagine the flight attendant asking, would you care for the ribeye steak or the smoked salmon today? Served on actual real china plates. Even when economy class rolled around in the mid-50s, the meals just blew our modern chicken or pasta choices out of the water. But remember, flying was unbelievably expensive. A single domestic ticket could cost a month's wages. Because of that, it was treated as a high-end social event. Passengers literally dressed to the nines in formal wear just to board the plane. Socializing was the entertainment. You weren't just commuting. You were at an exclusive gala in the sky. So what was the secret to all that legroom, the lounges, the flat beds? It all boils down to one simple number: 48. During that golden era, a massive, typical airliner like the Douglas DC-6 stretched about 100 feet long and 10 feet wide. But despite that huge footprint, it only carried 48 passengers. Total. Just imagine that sheer volume of space dedicated to fewer than 50 people. The math simply allowed for this uncompromised, extreme level of comfort. Okay, now let's flip this script. 150. That is the passenger count on a modern Airbus A320. And here's the kicker. That modern plane is barely bigger than the old DC-6. Actually, scratch that. It's exactly 20 feet longer and 2 feet wider. But instead of a breezy 48 people, airlines are packing 150 passengers on board today. This is exactly where that squished sardine feeling comes from. The physical metal tube we're flying in hasn't grown all that much, but the density of humanity stuffed inside has more than tripled. Why? To make air travel affordable enough for all of us. Because there were so few people on board in the 1950s, the vibe in the cabin was just completely different. Honestly, it's hard to even wrap your head around this today, but there were no mandatory seatbelts, not even during takeoff. You add in unlimited food and drinks, and it was essentially a flying cocktail party. But the absolute wildest part was the freedom of movement. Picture this. A little boy, totally unrestrained, just running up and down the aisles, playing all over the cabin mid-flight. For a young boy, the airplane was essentially a massive playground. That total freedom was the absolute hallmark of the era. But here is where reality crashes the luxury fantasy. Because seatbelts were optional and planes flew straight into terrible weather, hitting turbulence was a literal nightmare. Passengers would be caught completely off guard. The shaking would get so unimaginably violent that people would just be thrown around the cabin like rag dolls. And that unrestrained little boy having the time of his life running in the aisles, well, without warning, he could be thrown straight into the ceiling. This wasn't just a bumpy ride. It caused severe, life-altering injuries on a very regular basis. So why was the turbulence so much worse back then? It all comes down to altitude. The old Douglas DC-6 was powered by piston engines, which meant its ceiling, the absolute highest it could go, was only about 20,000 feet. At that low altitude, you are plowing right through the absolute worst of the Earth's weather systems. There's no escaping it. Modern jet planes, on the other hand, can easily climb up to 39,000 feet, which lets us cruise smoothly right over the top of heavy storms. So yeah, we lost the in-flight piano lounge, but we gained the ability to actually fly over the storm. Oh, and we definitely need to talk about the noise. Imagine an ear-splitting roar, literally louder than driving a car on the highway, with all the windows rolled down. Those old piston engines were basically just massive, unshielded car engines. The propellers were constantly roaring at max capacity, just to create enough lift to keep the plane in the sky. So while you were slicing into your smoked salmon on a fancy china plate, the cabin was absolutely deafening. You were essentially trading your hearing for the sheer novelty of being in the air. And this brings us to an incredibly vital lesson about engineering. When early jet airliners finally came onto the scene, promising to fly us higher and faster, the engineers made a critical mistake. They kept the old square windows from the piston era. This turned out to be a fatal flaw. As high-altitude pressure builds up inside a cabin, the 90-degree square corners of those windows take on the absolute maximum stress. The metal fuselage would literally crack at those exact weak points, leading to catastrophic depressurization. It was a devastating oversight, but it's exactly why every single modern airplane window you see today has to be rounded. The curves safely distribute that immense pressure. Which brings us right back to the seats. Sure, those 1950s seats were basically massive, super comfortable reclining beds. But in an accident, their sheer size and weight became a massive liability. They could be ripped straight out of the floorboards. Now take a look at the modern seats we complain about. Yes, they are cramped. Yes, they force you to keep your elbows tucked. But guys, they are heavily engineered survival tools. They're designed to dynamically absorb crash energy. They stay firmly bolted to the floor during an extreme impact. And the seat backs are specifically designed so you don't fracture your skull if things get violently rough. You are literally trading legroom for your life. And we can't ignore the journey itself. Statistically, takeoffs and landings are the most dangerous parts of any flight. Modern jets can cross entire oceans in a single hop, which minimizes that risk tremendously. But let's look at the 1947 Qantas route from Sydney to London. You depart on day 1, make an overnight stop on day 2, and you wouldn't actually reach London until day 4. And that was after surviving 6 different stops for refueling and maintenance. It sounds like a leisurely multi-day cruise, but every single one of those extra takeoffs and landings dramatically multiplied the risk of something going wrong. As aviation technology shifted its focus towards safety, the crew had to evolve too. In the 1950s, a stewardess was essentially treated as serving staff with a very strict dress code. Their primary job was to entertain the passengers, pour cocktails, and serve up those fancy ribeye steaks. Today, that role has undergone a massive, absolutely crucial shift. Modern flight attendants are highly trained safety professionals first and foremost. Their main job isn't to entertain you. It is to ensure you can safely evacuate a burning metal tube in under 90 seconds. Now, we can't really talk about aviation luxury without taking a quick detour to marvel at the ultimate flying palaces, the airships. Look, the modern Airbus A380 is a massive super jumbo jet that absolutely dwarfs other airplanes. But if you parked it next to the 1936 Hindenburg airship, the A380 would look like a little toy. The Hindenburg was an impossible 804 feet long and 135 feet wide. These giant rigid dirigibles were slow, cruising at a relaxing 76 miles per hour, but they offered a scale of luxury that our modern jets simply cannot even comprehend. So why aren't we all floating around in giant, spacious airships today? I mean, they were the ultimate tourist cruise in the sky. Well, they had one fatal flaw. They were filled with combustible hydrogen, which is obviously really bad news. The infamous 1937 Hindenburg disaster over New Jersey instantly and permanently halted their production. One catastrophic, highly combustible mistake ended an entire era of flight. And it proved, in the most tragic way possible, that safety absolutely must override pure luxury. But, human ingenuity is pretty relentless. The airship is actually making a comeback. But this time, they're using helium, not combustible, no boom. Today, there's a serious push to bring these giant dirigibles back to the skies. In fact, in a few years, a new generation of airships is planning to take passengers on actual North Pole expeditions. Because modern engineering finally solved that whole combustible hydrogen problem, the flying palaces are being reborn. It's fantastic news, right? Though, fair warning, it's an exclusive luxury cruise once again, with tickets currently going for around $80,000. Which brings us right to the ultimate conclusion of this explainer. Would you trade your safety for a mid-flight ribeye? When we look back at that golden age of flying, the pianos, the beds, the massive legroom, that little boy joyfully playing in the aisles, it is so easy to feel completely envious. But when you factor in the deafening engine roar, the violent bone-breaking turbulence, the shattering square windows, and seats that could literally rip from the floor, suddenly our cramped, highly engineered modern seats start to look like a pretty incredible deal. They are the necessary price of our survival. So the next time you're fighting over that middle armrest, ask yourself, isn't arriving in one piece totally worth the squeeze? Thank you so much for exploring this journey with me.